The yeshiva has been part of my life since I was born, before I was born. My mother was Rabbi Neuberger's secretary once upon a time, long ago in the early 50s. At that time, of course, the yeshiva was in Forest Park. And I can tell you Rabbi Neuberger, prodded by Rebbetzin Neuberger, basically made my parents shidduch. And as it happens, the other person involved in the shidduch, the other shadchan and others, was somebody named Rabbi Hertzberg. And then I came along a little bit later and ended up in the yeshiva, so here I am nearly 60 years later, something like that, being honored as musbich by that yeshiva for being the rabbi in Rabbi Hertzberg's shul. I guess you can sort of say history seems to have come full circle. I was once a scholar in residence not long ago in a shul in the Midwest, and I gave a number of talks there, some in halacha and some in history, and at the end this balabas comes over to me and he said, you know, you're spitz Ner Israel, you're typical Ner Israel. And I said, and what do you mean by that? What exactly is typical Ner Israel? What does that mean? And he said, that's just it, there is no such thing. Each one of you is so different, and that's what's typical about Ner Israel. Well, I'm a poster boy for that. I'm certainly different than many of the others who were my contemporaries in the yeshiva. But that's just it. The Rosh Yeshivas, Zechron Lebrocha and Rav Weinberg, prided themselves in working to develop each bacher in his own unique way. In my case, obviously, there was my natiyah to history, let's say. In other bacherim, there were other native predispositions. One of the best aspects of my years in the yeshiva was the freedom that I had to develop in my own way within the context of Torah. Looking back, if I had been forced to deny my natural interests, I would have either been turned off or emerged as a unwilling and an unhappy and an unhealthily stunted conformist. I would certainly not be in a position to make whatever contributions I can make. To my mind, this has been one of the tremendous special virtues of the yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva and the Rebbeim impacted us primarily, in my opinion, by showing us lives totally immersed in Torah, excelling in it, and being in love with what they were doing. The Ashreinu Matov Chalkenu cannot be, imperiously communicated, let's say. It can only be modeled. What impacted us was their personal example, and indeed their personification of this ideal. Each of us Talmidim then incorporated these ideals, or tried to, in his own unique way, adapted, to his unique personality. Now that I'm a rabbi, I try to do that with my congregants, each of whom I can assure you, every one of whom is a completely different type of person. Being who I am, I cannot help but have a historic perspective, shall we say, on the role of the yeshiva in Baltimore, where I have lived all my life. The Baltimore Jewish community looked very different in 1933 when the yeshiva was founded. Baltimore at that time was full of all kinds of Jewish organizations, institutions, including many that were, shall we say, super anti-frum. They had their heyday, extremely active, and they're full of members. Yeshiva was a tiny group of boys. You couldn't even call it a school with less than 10 boys. The shul I grew up in Forest Park was the shul where the Rosh Yeshiva, Zechron Lebrocha, got Rabbi Schwartz to get permission to house his small yeshiva. Rabbi Schwartz told him, look, you got a big building and you don't have so many members, the yeshiva bacher won't get in anybody's way. The shul was a half a block from my house on Norfolk Avenue. Now, what happened to all those clubs and guilds and organizations and institutions? They all died. Nobody killed them. They just died on their own. A big one actually died very recently. Why? What happened? The answer is, if you're not connected to an Eitz Chaim, if you have no roots in Torah, you don't have the nourishment, no matter how big and imposing the tree, sooner or later, it withers. The yeshiva is the only institution left from that time that is not only around today, but is thriving and strongly affecting Jewish life in Baltimore. Everyone knows this. Some like it and some do not, but everyone acknowledges this fact. Now, the yeshiva didn't fight with them or argue with them, just did its thing. It outsurvives them and ultimately displaces them. That's my perspective.